Welcome to Fanko Decodes. I am Fanko. April 12, 1945. Warm Springs, Georgia. The telephone rang in the White House. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that sliced through the humid afternoon air of Washington, D.C. The woman who picked up the receiver listened for a moment. Her face remained impassive, a mask of practiced stoicism that she had worn for decades. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was terrifyingly calm. "I am coming down," she said. She hung up the phone and turned to the man standing nearby, Vice President Truman. What she said next would stun everyone in the room and later the world. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She looked at Truman with steady eyes and asked, "Harry, is there anything we can do for you? For you are the one in trouble now." At that moment, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had just died. And this 61-year-old woman, his wife, did not mourn like a widow. She acted like a CEO during a corporate transition. Her first instinct was not personal grief, but the continuity of state power. Her name was Eleanor Roosevelt. Most history books will tell you this moment was a display of her legendary strength. They are wrong. This was not merely strength. It was professional competence. It was the reaction of a senior partner in a business, realizing the chairman of the board had just vacated his seat. Because there is a brutal truth behind that calm demeanor. At the very moment her husband was dying in Georgia, the mistress he had been entangled with for 30 years was sitting by his bedside. The woman who held his hand as he took his last breath was not his wife. Even more twisted, the person who arranged this secret, final tryst was Eleanor's own daughter. If you stood in her shoes, what would you do? Would you break down? Would you scream in a rage? Would you walk away and let the scandal burn the legacy to the ground? Eleanor Roosevelt chose none of these. She chose none of them because, in her mind, the husband who could hurt her had died 27 years earlier. In 1918, she had already metaphorically killed the wife who craved love, and, upon the ruins of that romance, signed a new contract with Franklin, a contract of cold, hard steel. She refused to be the trampled rose. Instead, she grasped the thorny scepter of power. People often say she was the woman behind Roosevelt, but today we are going to explore a different version of history. Perhaps Franklin Roosevelt was merely the ladder Eleanor used to ascend to her own godhood. This is a story of a 40-year game of chess. It is a story of how a woman, when marriage is reduced to a piece of paper and love is pulverized, uses the cards she is dealt to rewrite a script of victimhood into an epic of conquest. Do not believe the fairy tales. Today, let us unwrap the packaging of this perfect American marriage to reveal the bloody yet magnificent truth inside. The story begins in the autumn of 1884. Chapter 1. The Original Sin of Ugliness. The Girl Who Couldn't Speak. Let us transport ourselves to New York City, 1892. The Gilded Age is in full swing. 8-year-old Eleanor stands before a tall, ornate mirror, tears blurring her vision. Her mother, Anna Hall, a woman of breathtaking beauty and social standing, has just said it again. "My little Granny. Why can't you be beautiful like your aunts?" Granny. At 8 years old, her own mother calls her Granny. It wasn't a term of endearment for her maturity. It was a label for her lack of cuteness. In the Victorian era, a woman's value was calculated almost entirely by the symmetry of her face and the grace of her movement. A girl who wasn't beautiful was like a piece of porcelain with a hairline fracture destined for the back of the shelf. The cruelty was compounded by genetics. Her mother was a legendary beauty. Her aunts were socialites who commanded rooms with a smile. Why, Eleanor asked the mirror. Did the genetic lottery fail only her? The mirror offered no answers, only the reflection of a solemn, awkward child with prominent teeth and a receding chin. But fate was not done with her. Being ugly was just the prologue. In December 1892, Her mother Anna died of diphtheria. Eleanor was 8. In August 1894, her father Elliot, the only person who showed her unconditional affection, despite his demons, died from complications of severe alcoholism. Eleanor was 2 months shy of her 10th birthday. In a twist straight out of a Dickensian tragedy, she and her brother were sent to live with their maternal grandmother. It was a household of shadows. Her grandmother was stern and distant, but the real terror came from her 2 uncles, Volley and Eddie. Both were severe alcoholics. Uncle Volley was a figure of nightmares. He would get drunk and fire shotguns off the balcony. Once, in a delirious rage, he shot out the window of the nursery. The family had to install heavy iron locks on Eleanor's bedroom door, not to keep burglars out, but to protect the child from her own kin. Living under someone else's roof, Eleanor learned her first survival skill, invisibility. She learned to walk without making a sound. She learned never to speak out of turn, never to express a need, never to be a burden. Because when you are the ugly, unwanted orphan, existence itself feels like a debt you can never repay. She felt like the ugly duckling, but without the hope of becoming a swan. This childhood planted a seed of profound insecurity in her soul. This is the first trap of Eleanor's life. When you are defined as not enough from birth, you spend your entire life trying to prove your worth, often in distorted ways. However, there was a flicker of light. Her grandmother, perhaps realizing the toxicity of that house, made a decision that would change history. She shipped 15-year-old Eleanor off to a finishing school in England. The school was Allenswood, located in the outskirts of London. Here, Eleanor met the woman who would become the architect of her intellect, the headmistress Marie Savastra. Savastra was a radical for her time. She didn't give a damn about a girl's waistline or her ability to flutter a fan. She cared about the mind. She challenged the girls to think independently. She discussed the Boer War at dinner. She talked about social justice. And most importantly, she looked at Eleanor, this shy, awkward, terrified American girl, and saw raw potential. Eleanor's father had been a philanthropist before his decline, taking her to soup kitchens. Savastra reignited that spark. She showed Eleanor that while she might not be decorative, she could be useful. Savastra did something revolutionary. She invited Eleanor into her private library. She treated her as an equal. She asked for her opinion on religion, on politics, on history. For the first time in her life, Eleanor realized, my thoughts have weight. I do not need to be beautiful to be respected. Curiosity and courage, Savastra told her, are more important than beauty. This intellectual nourishment was the oxygen Eleanor had been suffocating for. When she returned to New York at age 18, she was transformed. She spoke fluent French, she knew history, and she had opinions. But New York high society was not Allenswood. It was a meat market wrapped in silk, and it did not welcome a woman with ideas. It is 1902, the debutante season. 18-year-old Eleanor is dragged to ball after ball. This is the Victorian mating ritual, finding a husband to secure one's future. She hated every second of it. She couldn't dance well. She couldn't flirt. She didn't know how to play the game of feigned ignorance to stroke the male ego. She watched the other debutantes, butterflies and lace, and felt nothing but disdain for the superficiality of it all. While they gossiped, Eleanor joined the Junior League, an organization dedicated to helping immigrants and the poor. She went to the slums of the Lower East Side. She taught calisthenics to factory girls. She saw filth, disease, and poverty. In her circle, a debutante visiting a slum was considered unseemly. Her peers mocked her eccentricity, but she didn't care. For the first time, in the eyes of those poor children, she wasn't the ugly duckling. She was a savior. And then fate intervened on a dance floor. Autumn 1902. On a train ride, she encountered a distant cousin. His name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was 20, a student at Harvard, wealthy, handsome, and possessing a smile that could melt glaciers. He was the golden boy. She was the wallflower. But Franklin was intrigued. Why? Because she was different. Unlike the other girls who giggled about ribbons, Eleanor talked to him about the housing conditions in the tenements. She challenged his political views. She had substance. For a young man with ambition, she was intellectually stimulating in a way no one else was. They began to date. He proposed in 1903. On March 17, 1905, Eleanor married Franklin. Giving the bride away was her uncle, the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. The wedding date was actually set to accommodate Teddy's schedule. He was in town for the St. Patrick's Day parade. Even her wedding wasn't really about her. At that moment, it looked like a fairy tale. Two Roosevelts uniting. But no one knew that this marriage would become the bloodiest battlefield of Eleanor's life. Because the cruel truth of marriage is this: a difference that attracts you in the beginning often becomes the very thing that tears you apart in the end. Chapter 2. The Prison of Matrimony. The Dusk of the Love Letters, Washington, D.C., September 1918. 34-year-old Eleanor is unpacking a suitcase. Franklin has just returned from inspecting naval battlefields in Europe. He has collapsed with double pneumonia and is bedridden. Being the dutiful wife, she is sorting through his luggage. And then she finds the packet, a bundle of letters. The handwriting is feminine, elegant, familiar. They are letters between Franklin and his social secretary, Lucy Mercer. Eleanor opens them. She shouldn't, but she does. The content is not ambiguous. These are not the letters of a boss and an employee. They are filled with terms of endearment, inside jokes, plans for secret meetings, and expressions of longing. Eleanor's hands begin to tremble. 13 years of marriage. 6 children birthed, 1 lost in infancy. She had subordinated her entire existence to his career, to his home, to his needs. And the whole time, he was laughing at her with her own secretary. The irony was acidic. Eleanor had hired Lucy Mercer in 1914. She had brought this young, beautiful, Catholic girl from a Maryland family into her home. That night, Eleanor did not scream. She did not throw a vase against the wall. She placed the letters neatly on the table and waited for the fever to break. "We need to talk," she said when he was lucid. The betrayal was agonizing, but what truly broke Eleanor wasn't just the infidelity. It was the realization that for 13 years, she had been systematically erasing herself for a man who didn't appreciate the sacrifice. Let's rewind to understand the depth of this erasure. When they married in 1905, Eleanor hoped for a partnership. She wanted to be a team, but reality was a sledgehammer called Sarah Delano Roosevelt, Franklin's mother. Sarah was a matriarch of the old school. She controlled the purse strings, and she controlled the house. She told Eleanor bluntly, "A Roosevelt wife does not work in slums. Your job is to breed and host." Sarah took over everything. She chose the furniture. She hired the nannies. She dictated how the grandchildren were raised. She once told Eleanor's children, "Your mother only bore you. I am more of a mother to you than she is." Eleanor tried to rebel using science. When her first daughter Anna was born, she read a modern book suggesting babies needed fresh air. She hung a wire cage out the window of their New York townhouse and put the baby in it for naps. The neighbors threatened to call the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Eleanor retreated, humiliated, back into her shell. For 10 years, she was either pregnant or recovering from birth. She was not a person. She was a biological vessel for the Roosevelt dynasty. Until World War I, in 1917, the U.S. entered the war. Franklin was Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Eleanor found a loophole in her prison: patriotism. She began working at the Red Cross canteen at Union Station. This wasn't unseemly charity. This was the war effort. Even Sarah couldn't stop her. She woke up at 5 a.m. She made thousands of sandwiches. She scrubbed floors. She comforted dying soldiers. And in the chaos of the canteen, she rediscovered the girl from Allenswood. She was organized. She was a natural leader. She had executive function. She was just starting to find herself when she found the letters. September 1918. The confrontation. Eleanor offered Franklin a divorce. It was a simple ultimatum. Choose your mistress, Lucy, or your future, me. Franklin's reaction revealed the true nature of their union. He hesitated. He wanted Lucy, but his mother, Sarah, threatened to cut him off financially if he divorced. His political advisor, Louis Howe, told him a divorced man could never be president of the United States. Franklin, the charmer, the romantic, did the math. He chose the money and the presidency. He begged Eleanor to stay. In that moment, something inside Eleanor snapped. The part of her that was a Victorian wife, desperate for affection, died on the spot. But from the ashes, a political animal was born. She realized, to him, this marriage is not a union of souls. It is a corporate merger. If she divorced him now, she would be a cast-aside woman with 5 children, a footnote in history. But if she stayed, she held the leverage. She looked at Franklin and agreed to stay, but on her terms. It was a reverse takeover. They established a new unspoken contract. 1. The brand remains. No divorce. They present a united front for the sake of his career. 2. Physical autonomy. They would live separate lives under the same roof. No more conjugal duties. Eleanor regained ownership of her body and her time. 3. Power sharing. She would support his politics, but he must support her causes. She was no longer a subordinate. She was a partner. From the moment that agreement was struck, Eleanor ceased to be a victim. She stayed not because she was weak, but because she realized that being a cold, calculating first lady offered more power than being a free divorcee in 1918. This is the essence of the Roosevelt partnership. Separated in heart, united in ambition. She killed the soft, yielding Eleanor, and she prepared for war. Chapter 3. The King is Paralyzed. The Opportunity in Disaster, August 1921. Campobello Island. Franklin, now 39, is vacationing. He goes for a swim, feels a chill, and within days, his legs stop working. Polio. The golden boy, the rising star, is paralyzed from the waist down. He has to be carried like a child. He cannot stand. For a man whose entire persona was built on vigor and vitality, this was a death sentence. But for Eleanor, this is a dark thought, but we must articulate it. Franklin's paralysis was Eleanor's liberation. Before the illness, he was the sun, and she was the moon reflecting his light. Now, he was immobile. If he wanted to maintain his political life, he needed a proxy. He needed someone to be his legs, his eyes, and his voice. His mother, Sarah, wanted him to retire to the country and be an invalid. She wanted to hide him away. Eleanor, instinctively, wanted to fight, but she needed a general. Enter Louis Howe, the chain-smoking, disheveled political strategist who saw Eleanor's potential before anyone else. Howe told Eleanor, if he goes home now, he is finished. And if he is finished, you are back under Sarah's thumb. You must become him. So, the training began. Eleanor became Franklin's avatar. Franklin couldn't campaign. Eleanor went to the rallies. Franklin couldn't inspect facilities. Eleanor put on her boots. At first, she was terrible. She was terrified of public speaking. Her voice was high-pitched and nervous. She would giggle uncontrollably at inappropriate moments. Louis Howe sat in the back of the room, analyzing her. He was brutal. Stop that giggling. Project your voice. Don't look at the floor. She endured the criticism. She practiced. She hardened. And in the process, she built her own power base. The people she met weren't just Franklin's friends anymore. They became Eleanor's allies. The labor unions, the women's groups, the African American leaders, they began to look to her, not him. In 1928, Franklin was elected governor of New York. The public saw a triumph of will, a crippled man rising. But insiders knew the truth. Without Eleanor's 8 years of relentless legwork, Franklin would have been a forgotten invalid in Hyde Park. She thought they had reached a new equilibrium, a partnership of equals. But the ghost of Lucy Mercer never really left. Eleanor discovered, years later, the depth of the deception. Franklin had never stopped loving Lucy. Throughout the 1920s, they wrote letters. In 1933, at his first presidential inauguration, Franklin arranged for a limousine to bring Lucy to the ceremony so she could watch him take the oath. For 12 years in the White House, while Eleanor was out saving the world, Lucy was being smuggled in through the back door under the code name Mrs. Paul Johnson. And finally, April 12, 1945, when Eleanor arrived at Warm Springs and learned that Lucy had been there, that Lucy had been the one smiling at him while his brain hemorrhaged, the realization was total. The contract of 1918 had been violated, but only on his side. He had lied for 27 years. But this time, there were no tears, no ultimatums. Eleanor sat alone in the room at Warm Springs. She realized that by sacrificing her emotional needs for the partnership, she had inadvertently freed herself. She didn't need his love anymore. She had built something far more durable, a legacy. This is the third trap. When you sacrifice yourself to save someone else, you expect gratitude. Usually, you get betrayal. But if you are Eleanor Roosevelt, you take that betrayal and use it as fuel to launch yourself into the stratosphere. Chapter 4. Refusing to be a shadow, the revolution of my day. March 4th, 1933. Washington, D.C., Franklin D. Roosevelt is sworn in as the 32nd president. The nation cheers for the New Deal, but that night, Eleanor is depressed. A friend asks her why. Eleanor replies, "I never wanted to be a president's wife. Now I have lost my own identity." Traditionally, the First Lady was a ceremonial hostage. Her job was to pour tea, smile at diplomats, and pick out china patterns. Eleanor looked at that cage and decided to smash it. She told Franklin, "I will not just be your wife. I am a citizen." She refused to let the Secret Service follow her everywhere. She refused to give up her teaching job immediately. She refused to live only in the White House. Then, she did something unprecedented. She became a media mogul. In 1935, she launched a syndicated newspaper column titled My Day. Think of it as the world's first blog or Twitter feed. 6 days a week, for 27 years, she wrote about her thoughts. At its peak, My Day appeared in 90 newspapers, reaching over 4 million readers daily. She realized that the title First Lady was a platform, and she hijacked it. She built a personal brand independent of the president. She wrote about household budgets during the Depression. Yes, but she also slipped in radical ideas. She wrote about lynching. She wrote about women's rights. She wrote about workers' strikes. She became Eleanor everywhere. She traveled 40,000 miles in her first year alone. She went down into coal mines where the Secret Service refused to go. She walked through the shantytowns, Hoovervilles. She ate the meager food of the poor. She became Franklin's eyes and ears. She would come back to the White House, barge into the Oval Office, and dump a pile of reports on his desk. "Franklin, you can't just look at the statistics. I saw their faces. They are starving." She was the conscience of the administration. Often, she was to the left of the president. They fought. They argued. They communicated via memos because they were too angry to speak. But she never backed down. When Franklin died in 1945, The political world expected Eleanor to fade away into quiet widowhood. That is what first ladies do. Enter Harry Truman. When Truman asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" and she reversed the question, she was signaling her transition. Truman, smart enough to recognize her power, appointed her as a delegate to the newly formed United Nations. The stunning climax of her life wasn't in the White House. It was in Paris. 1948. Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the committee to draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She had to wrangle the Soviets, the British, the Chinese, and the Americans into agreeing on a singular definition of human dignity. It was her diplomatic masterpiece. On December 10, 1948, the Declaration passed. The General Assembly stood and gave her a standing ovation. At that moment, she was not Mrs. Roosevelt. She was the First Lady of the world. She worked until she was 76. She died in 1962, a titan in her own right. Epilogue. A long goodbye, November 7, 1962. Eleanor Roosevelt dies in New York. Her funeral is attended by 4 U.S. Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, Truman, Eisenhower, standing guard like sentinels. But let us go to the Rose Garden in Hyde Park. There stands a simple white marble tombstone. It lists 2 names: Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1882 to 1945, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, 1884 to 1962. If you look closely at that stone, you aren't seeing a monument to a romance. You are seeing the final seal on a contract that lasted half a century. This explains why, on that day in 1945, Eleanor didn't cry. Tears are for those who still harbor illusions. Eleanor had traded her illusions for armor 27 years prior. Fate is a cruel but fair judge. Look at Lucy Mercer, the woman who won the man's love. She had to flee the deathbed like a thief in the night. She died in obscurity, a footnote in a scandal, buried in a graveyard few visit. And Eleanor, the ugly girl, the woman who was never truly loved by her husband? She refused to drown in the puddle of romantic rejection. Instead, she swam into the ocean of history. She proved that if life denies you the right to be a beloved woman, you have the right to evolve into a great human. She saw through the nature of marriage that it is often just 2 souls huddling for warmth. When the fire went out, she didn't freeze. She picked up the unburnt logs and built a torch to light up the world. Separate lives, shared ambition. It sounds bleak, but it was the ultimate act of clarity. Standing before that grave today, we do not see a happy couple. We see a monument to human will. It whispers a secret to every person who feels unloved or undervalued. Do not wait to be loved. Make yourself necessary. Do not look for missing pieces in another person. Build your own fortress. If you cannot be the moonlight in someone's heart, be the sun that illuminates the age. This is Eleanor Roosevelt's answer. It is not about forgiveness. It is not about emotion. It is about how a woman, standing in the wasteland of despair, used pure reason and ambition to crown herself king. This is Fanko. In the river of history, tears dry first. Only the souls forged in fire remain. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next Decode.